outlined a discrete number of steps in different traditions, and it seems like some of those steps in certain circumstances can be bypassed or like jump to the head of the line in certain cases.
Depending on the practice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll repeat the question. So the question was that I had described a sequence of steps in different systems of practice, and that what you said is it seems that some of these steps, there's differences in these descriptions, and they don't all include all the same steps, which suggests that some of these steps can be bypassed in different systems. And that is true. Depending on the system of practice that you're following, you won't necessarily experience all of exactly the same things. Now, what you do, a very good example of this, one that is worth mentioning. The Buddha, if we look at the sutras, one of the sutras teaches us that whenever somebody is awakened, that seems to happen in one of the following ways. Either they attained samata, and samata corresponds to the stage beyond the ninth stage in Kamalashila's rendering. So first you achieve samata, and then you attain insights, following which you achieve awakening. Secondly is that a yogi may first attain insight, following which samata is cultivated, and in that way achieve awakening. Or samata and insight may be attained yoked together in some way, and there's various ways they could be yoked together. But they are attained together, yoked together, leading to awakening. And if we refer to these three possible approaches, we'll be able to understand a lot of the differences in the sequences that happen. In particular, whenever vipassana is developed before samatha, there are some difficult, painful stages that a person goes through. So, for example, in the second path, when it is practiced by somebody who is first cultivating the analytical meditation on emptiness, prior to developing samatha, they go through a very unpleasant state. That is where they experience a lot of discomfort, suffering, things like that. Likewise, in the Theravadan tradition, with the 16 knowledges, in the middle part of the purification by knowledge and vision of the way, the yogi who is doing what's called a dry insight practice and has not yet developed samatha will go through a series of knowledges that are known as the dukkha jnanas. Jnana means knowledge and dukkha means suffering. So they're the suffering knowledges. And they're given the most descriptive names possible. Knowledge of fear, knowledge of misery, and knowledge of disgust. And so this is a reflection of the vipassana before samatha approach. The reason being that when you have samatha, you have profound tranquility and equanimity. You already have a lot of equanimity in place, and you have a mind that is in a state of joy. Joy is a mind that is predisposed to see things in a positive light. When you do dry insight, or when you do the analytical meditation on emptiness, it leads you to a situation where you have intellectually this understanding that, wow, things really are empty, and the self that I cling to is an illusion. But at the deepest level, you're still firmly believing in the self. So what you have is a self that has no solid ground to stand on, a self that is living in a world of hurt with no way out. So the intellectual mind has opened Pandora's box. The gut level emotional mind says, oh, this is happening to me, that I am condemned to be in this horrible state. Okay? So when you're still attached to self and you see and you intellectually understand reality, it can be very disturbing, very painful. If in your meditation practice you've seen the fleetingness of everything, the impermanence, and if you realize that to try to grasp to any of that can only cause you harm, and there is no ground to stand on, then a feeling of fear arises. And then when you realize that this is all there is no way out, then it turns to misery and disgust. And this can, I think this stage, I think in both the second path of the five-path system and in the Dukkha-jnanas of the 16 knowledge system, they use the same terminology to describe the danger that a yogi is in. And this is called the rolling up the mat stage. The yogi can, because this is so terrible, abandon the practice, roll up the mat, and the typical thing they do is they leave the retreat, go to a bar, try to lose themselves in sensory distractions to the greatest possible degree. And it's a very unfortunate thing. If they stay with the practice, if the yogi in either of these traditions stays with the practice, then they'll come to the point where the emotional mind will become exhausted in its misery and its disgust. And it's like if you know what it's like when you reach the point of emotional exhaustion. In a way, it finally gives you some peace and a little bit of clarity. And it's in that clarity that the person can make the resolve that, okay, the only way out of this is to have refuge in the Buddha's enlightenment. That indeed this teaching is real. Indeed, there is something at the end of the path. And therefore, I'll go back, I'll re-enter the fray. I will resubmit myself to the practice until I achieve the goal and the fruit. So now if a yogi has developed really strong samata, then this is a tremendous buffer to being able to confront these insights with equanimity, with tranquility. And a mind in a state of joy, even when it sees the unpleasant, doesn't see it as being so unpleasant. And so it's much easier to pass through this. The one other path and approach that is beneficial is the more that a person can loosen their attachment to the view of self, because it is the attachment to the personality view that is really responsible for suffering. Your mind generates the emotion of suffering when, the computer processes the information and the result that is generated is bad news, we better suffer, and so suffering is turned on. The bad news in this case is the attachment to personality view. So that the more the person can overcome their attachment to personality view, weaken that attachment before the full brunt of these insights hits them, then the less disturbing it's going to be for them. Now, if that's done in combination with samata, then it's pretty easy. It's pretty clear sailing. In all of these methods, though, and I mentioned this earlier, there is the union of samata and insight that is necessary to reach the awakening. Because you need the equanimity of the samata and you need the equanimity of the insight together have enough equanimity that craving ceases. Equanimity is the opposite of craving. You can say equanimity is the absence of craving. Equanimity is non-reactivity, non-grasping the pleasant, non-trying to avoid the unpleasant. When the pleasant and the unpleasant and the neutral are all confronted with exactly the same non-reactivity, that is equanimity. In other words, there is no craving. So you need the combined equanimity of both insight and samata. Typically, in these systematic practices, you need the combined insight of both to give you the ability to step out of craving. When the cessation of craving occurs, what is revealed is nirvana. Nirvana is the cessation of craving. The cause of nirvana is the cessation of craving. When craving is gone, nirvana can be experienced, and it can be, in a sense, the object of consciousness for a period of time.